Hello, Internet world. My name is David Boice, author from 52 Churches in 52 Weeks. Today, I'm going to share some thoughts, actually a lot of thoughts, about church and the upcoming metaverse, and whether the next mission field for the church should have a presence in virtual reality or not. So if you like what you hear, hit the like button and hit subscribe if you like to support the channel. But today we're going to jump straight into things. So if you haven't heard, there was a recent posting by Facebook Big Cheese Mark Zuckerberg, where he appeared in a bizarre video that featured himself and his virtual self in a obvious PR move to shift focus away from its recent whistleblower scandal. Well, it worked. And the big news was Facebook was rebranding its umbrella company to become Meta, and then unveiled its big plans for what they've been working on for quite a bit now when it comes to virtual and augmented reality with the announcement of the Metaverse. So reactions to the Metaverse were mixed. For some, it sounds absolutely remarkable. Especially for those who may have been cooped up during the pandemic and spent a considerable amount of time online. For others, and myself included, you can't help but feel skeptical about it because it involves Zuckerberg, who essentially made this Black Mirror episode or recreated the plot from Ready Player One or even maybe The Matrix, and he kind of combined all that into this one announcement. And it's hard to shake this unsettling feeling about it, mainly because it involves Facebook. It started off as a great idea to connect with friends and family, but over the past several years, it has also disconnected us from actual reality. Essentially, its own algorithms have sown these seeds of distrust and division and destruction in the world right now. Elections haven't helped. The spread of misinformation versus the lack of transparency regarding fact checkers. And I think the shock to many, whether you love him or you hate him, the fact that big tech could ban Trump during his last days as president of the United States of America, it kind of made a lot of people wonder who really has the power. So what's worse is, other than everyone voluntarily deleting their accounts, which we all know is not going to happen, there's been little to no answer when it comes to how Facebook or other type of social media companies can stop this further divide among people, because everyone just seems to be in their own little echo chambers right now to determine what's good and what's bad. So the consequences, it's almost like social media, it's constantly outpacing regulations. It's constantly outpacing what we understand and what we may be able to see when it comes to the long-term consequences, when it comes to mental health or society as a whole. But despite all of that, despite not even addressing the issue in terms of what social media has unleashed on the world, Zuckerberg is kind of dangling the metaverse as his new bright, shiny object, kind of like a carrot in front of me, in front of you, and in front of 3 billion other registered users on the platform. And he's promising this new virtual world of make-believe where you can live wherever you want to be and you can be whoever you want to be. So maybe this will sound a little overdramatic, but it feels like as a civilization, as humans, the world is telling us more and more that God's not real. God is dead. And you don't have to listen to all those fairy tale stories from 2,000 years ago that were all cobbled together in some book. The digital age, that is the new world. That's the new status quo. And I think the quote you often hear from Nietzsche is God's dead. And there's been several Christian movies tried to be based off that quote, but not very good ones, I should say, but that's my opinion. But what many people don't talk about is what Nietzsche said right after that, and that's how we could live as murderers of all murderers. How could we console ourselves? Like, who could wipe the blood from us? What would we need to invent? What would we need to justify? To what kind of sacred games would we need to play to substitute God that we just replaced? His answer was we'd elevate ourselves as gods ourselves, but that was something that he was absolutely terrified about. So with Zuckerberg's announcement, it comes at an interesting time, right? So the church as a whole has been wondering out loud for a number of years why there's been a mass exodus among millennials and Gen Z from organized religion. And despite all the complexities as to why, and certainly social media has played its part in that, the result that you're seeing is there's been this big black hole that's been created and left in the culture. And for instance, when it comes to like any type of endangered species, you often hear that it's a sign that the ecosystem is slowly falling apart. And what we're seeing with the church is our moral framework is slowly decaying with more and more younger generations falling from it. To Nietzsche's point, if we substitute God during these transformative years of the digital age, what kind of sacred games do we invent in order to substitute God in this virtual spiritual void? So what's bizarre and ironic with social media branching off into this announcement of the metaverse, we're getting closer and closer to witnessing this twisted 21st century retelling of Genesis. But this time, big tech is essentially trying their hand to recraft Genesis in its own image. So the impression of Zuckerberg using his right hand to type into existence out of nothing, he types all these zeros and ones in binary code, hits the enter button, and big bangs this whole metaverse into existence. It just feels like his own personal matrix is being designed to make himself come across as some kind of technological quasi-god or something. It's almost like he's sitting atop his Silicon Valley throne, feeling like he's almost some self-appointed social media savior, because after all, he just banished the big bad orange man to the fiery pits of Mar-a-Lago. So with that over, now he can overlook his meta creation and command his legions of developers and coders to act as his angels to further expand and police it. That kind of power, designed for profit and commerce, it feels too great for one company, much less one man, to have that much control over so many aspects of so many people's lives throughout the world. It's like, as a civilization, like, we are giving the okay to bend reality, and we're not expecting it to bend back and swing back and hit us. So that brings us to the very first commercial for Meta, and it had some very curious imagery used in it that you've probably seen airing recently. So with the commercial, it starts with 4 hip Gen Zers, a demographic who Facebook and Meta is obviously targeting to snatch eyeballs away from TikTok and Snapchat. So they all gather around this painting that gradually comes to life. So the painting is called Battling Tiger and Buffalo. It was made in 1908 by a French self-taught painter named Henri Rousseau, who worked on the piece while he was in prison for fraud. So he essentially was quarantined. So he never got to explore the jungle, but with him being stuck in France, He never was able to explore the jungle, so he relied on travel books to create his art. And his art became so famous because he did it himself. All the other type of artists, they were being taught from the same type of classrooms. Even Pablo Picasso took a lot of inspiration from what Rousseau had done. So when it comes to the actual commercial, you see the tiger, who's actually in the painting, he's pinning the buffalo. The buffalo is the prey. The tiger is the predator. In the commercial, it almost looks like the tiger and the buffalo are friends. Almost like the tiger is kind of hugging the buffalo up on top. Now, that's all up to interpretation. You may see something that I don't. But the commercial starts with the tiger saying, "This is the dimension of imagination." That is a direct quote from the intro from The Twilight Zone, which often dived into dystopian fiction that we're on the cusp of today. So what the commercial does next is you as a viewer, you go through this stylistic Garden of Eden looking utopia where you have animated birds bouncing, flamingos twerking, and then snakes. Snakes curl out of the trees. So as the four kids become mesmerized by the upbeat dance music, their old world starts collapsing behind them, and they start to dance in sync with the four snakes hanging from the trees. So the imagery, the symbolism, the literal screams from Genesis 3 makes this sound like such a red flag for what this could turn into. So before the ad ends, their reality changes and they're absorbed into this new world. A message ends the whole thing by promising, "This is going to be fun." So that's a temptation. That's a temptation before the bite. We're falling in love with the illusion all over again. So instead of God creating man in his own image, now you can create the image that you want to be. Instead of the serpent tempting Eve to bite from the fruit, the passage goes, "For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Now what they're saying is now you can open the eyes of others, and like God's, you can be seen the way that you want to be in this different existence. So height, weight, sex, gender, skin tone, hairstyle, body type, species, cartoon, you can be whatever you want. You want to be rich, you want to be athletic, you want to be good looking, you want a perfect chest, you want a perfect butt. Maybe you want to be big and bulky. Maybe you want to have red skin. Maybe you want to have devil horns on your head with a tail sticking out of its butt. No problem. If you're not happy with how God made you on earth, now you have the power to become whatever you want to be in the metaverse, along with everyone else until someone pulls a plug. So that's the illusion. That's the temptation. And that's the bite we're being advertised to sink our teeth into. Many believe that a literal Garden of Eden never existed. It was nothing but a fairy tale. Others believe the Garden of Eden literally was 6,000 years ago on the dot. And I guess my question is, could it be neither? Could, in a spiritual, metaphysical sense, could the Garden of Eden live inside of all of us? Like a tree rooted inside all of you and me, everyone. And before Adam used to walk in the garden with God side by side, it's the same with us. When we're walking with a loved one or walking with God, there's intimacy, there's connection, and we're walking on this same path. Curiously, in the Genesis tale, one day Adam and Eve, they weren't walking with God that day. And when the snake got there, he promised them that they could be like God. We do the same thing every day. We take the bait. And just like the fruit, the apple, whatever, the means to temptation keeps changing for all of us, and it matches whatever our current circumstances are. So it makes you wonder, should Christianity, the church, religion, what have you, should it have any place within the metaverse or virtual reality in the future when it's essentially brokered by big tech. On one hand, the Christian message, it has always emphasized preaching the gospel throughout the nations, as commanded by Christ in the Great Commission. On the other hand, should the church stay put and anchor itself as a rock in the real world, becoming some type of refuge that withstands joining not just the world, but this other world? One angle to look at the church going all in on the metaverse is how Christianity has lagged behind in recent years, well, recent decades, when it comes to new tools of communication. So throughout mankind, the church and other forms of religion they've always had its foot in the door when it came to technological advances with the ways we communicate the Word of God. Obviously, word of mouth is the easiest, but the most famous piece of literature on a stone tablet, you instantly think of the Ten Commandments. When you think of scrolls or letters or a book, the first thing you think about is the Bible or the Gospels or the letters of Paul. When you think about the printing press, when that was first invented, the first thing that went viral was Martin Luther's 95 Theses that launched the Protestant Reformation. In the 1920s, that was the invention of the radio. And it only took 2 months for the church to have its first church service broadcast, even though many preachers and skeptics at that time thought the radio was satanic and was transmitting radio waves of evil thoughts and stuff. When TV was invented, the church televangelists, it didn't happen overnight, but when the TV overcame radio as the primary home entertainment device, there was already tons of televangelists on TV. Though the drawback for many just was probably the prosperity gospel really rising from that medium. But with the 80s, there came a new wrinkle in technology, and that was when video games and computers gained popularity. And the church treated those inventions kind of like how Blockbuster treated Netflix as a threat. As a result, the church never had an answer to it. So, like at first, video games, it was just childish entertainment. I remember as a kid playing Mario, you jump on a Goomba in the first level, and it was just innocent fun. Not more than 10 years later, out came arcade games like Mortal Kombat, where kids could just enter a few combo buttons, and then they could be uppercutting the head off a female ninja as her bikini-clad body landed in some kind of pit of acid. Fatality. Then came first-person shooters like Doom and GoldenEye, and probably the most infamous was Grand Theft Auto, which was the first really well-designed sandbox game where the gamer was rewarded for committing crimes like carjacking, arson, and murder. There was so much freedom to the game, and that drew in a lot of young men, especially. So within a span of 20 years, an innocent media platform that started just jumping on a fictional Goomba had manifested itself into a place where your video game character could take a rocket launcher and shoot at whoever that you'd want within that game's design. Video game violence spiraled out of control so fast. And I remember thinking back then as a Christian, I had to take a moment to reflect. Am I committing murder in this virtual world? Am I sinning? Will I need to answer for this at some point? The famous passage from Jesus is, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully in his heart has already committed adultery with her. Did the same apply to video game murder? Like, I'm hitting a button, I'm committing all these different things, but there's no real world consequences. Church sermons never addressed that, and it was always for grown-ups back then. But looking back at it, video game violence, it spiraled out of control so fast. So you had a lot of millennial boys who grew up on video games as their preferred home entertainment system. There wasn't a single Christian video game or alternative that could complement the Bible back then. And still to this day, there isn't. I'm sure even if that happened, some ultra conservative type of ministry would have called it hearsay. There just was no there was no Christian video game ministry. So the world sunk its teeth into that entertainment medium, and Christianity just never could touch that. So now we fast forward 20, 30, 40 years later, and now you see that big black hole in the church numbers among millennials and Gen Z who were born with video games and smartphones. And the church wonders why, especially when it comes to young men, why young men are leaving the church in droves. Well, young men and these generations, like, they grew up spending infinite more time as gamers than as believers. So there really hasn't been anything to help serve as a complement to the Bible with these generations and what these generations have been consuming all their lives. So the church missed a huge opportunity when it came to gaming and getting its foot in the door with those type of technologies. And I mean, even with apps, the only thing that the Christian message can preach through the apps is your typical Bible apps. So when it comes back to the metaverse, even though it has the potential for being this virtual Sodom and Gomorrah, and not many feel good about big tech basically owning the whole thing in this strange Zuckerberg godlike complex, there's a window to set up virtual real estate early. And this isn't just some random, like when it comes to Facebook doing this announcement, this isn't just some random startup company. This is Facebook. Facebook is worth some, $80 billion or whatever it earned in revenue last year. And with Zuckerberg essentially putting himself out there, his reputation on the line to promote it, it's going to have his full backing on it. So do you try and use this new medium as a tool in this new world with all these new virtual nations? Do you preach the good news with technology that is not going to replace the Bible, but it can aid the Bible? It can introduce the Bible to a new subset of younger generations. So when it comes to what's upcoming, like with the Bible, it's all right there. You don't need to hire a team of writers and come up with some new original story. You can use augmented reality. You can, instead of kids using virtual guns to shoot down zombies, you can put kids in the sandals or the virtual sandals of Noah, Moses, or David. You can have them walk around to find a seat at the Sermon on the Mount. You can have them see the excitement as someone who Jesus just healed. You can see the excitement from their eyes. And who knows? The Bible has been translated to all kinds of different languages. Can the Bible be translated to virtual reality? Can it be translated to augmented reality? You open a chapter and it places you in that scene that you see yourself. So instead of living by Christ's example, you get to live to see Christ's example. So it's a big task. You'd have to create the right team with the right direction, but it could revolutionize Christianity for a new generation. But this is just brainstorming. I mean, whatever happens, the thing is, it needs to get out there fast. I think what we learned from video games is you can't wait 40 years and then have all the Mortal Kombats and the Grand Theft Autos and the Call of Duties come out and then expect that you can preach the gospel in this new type of technology. Now, that said, there's also potential cons. So the first is you're participating in this fake world. You also, and this is what happened with TV, you may find prosperity gospel ministries or someone else who uses their financial power to get into the game quick. There was a New York Times article that was released this summer about how Facebook was intensifying partnerships with various faith communities across the United States to shape how the future of the religious experience would be done. In the article, church leaders from Hillsong Church reached out to Facebook to gain advice on how to rebuild church after the pandemic. So now, granted, Churches hosting on Facebook is nothing new, but with churches closed during the pandemic and they've been trying to find new ways to attract community, what would a partnership look like between the church and Facebook or Meta, whatever that they're calling themselves now? What would that look like within the metaverse? What would church look like? And it makes you wonder, would you be singing? Would you be worshiping inside some kind of virtual 3D Hillsong church? Could you attend a real-time mass from the Vatican and have it projected in your living room with augmented reality? How would that impact actual church community? Like, how would you serve as the church if you're doing all this from home? So there's a lot of variables. There's a lot of unknowns, but this is just a sampling of some thoughts about what could happen with church in the future, because right now we're on the cusp of something new. We're in the wild, wild west to this new frontier, and whether that's Meta or something else, who knows? But the technology, it's getting so close to lifelike. It's something that the church is going to need to look into the future, but it can't lollygag around when it comes to new inventions like it has within the past 30, 40 years. So, but that's going to do it for me. If you have some thoughts about church and its role in the future with the metaverse, feel free to leave those comments below. If you'd like to support my work, check out my book, 52 Churches in 52 Weeks on Amazon. It's in the link below. Currently, it's in paperback, ebook, and free with a Kindle Unlimited subscription. Hardcover is on the way. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button as well to stay up to date for future church-related content. So until next time, thanks for watching.